Hey, Dan here, working on a Sunday as nobody should be, but it's when you get most of your work done. Hope you're all going well, hope you're all having a great day, week, weekend, whatever you're doing. So, I want to talk to you a little bit about disruptive innovation and how does disruptive innovation work? Well, the process begins typically with a new company addressing a gap in the market. So where a segment of the population has traditionally been overlooked, a company will come along with a product or service that fits into that segment. Occasionally it can be a product or service that has never existed before. On other occasions it can combine existing products and make something new, such as the wheel and the suitcase, put them together, and what do we have now? Suitcases with wheels, which sounds really simple but was massively innovative at the time. And then of course the third way is being completely disruptive, whereby you effectively wipe out an industry by developing an alternative to solve a problem. So if we look at during lockdown, there were a lot of companies that needed to do meetings, and traditionally the airlines would try and give businesses good corporate rates and upgrades and discount hotels and loyalty schemes and all that kind of stuff. Now the reality is, a disruptive company, which was Zoom, came along and said, what do these companies need? Well, they need the ability to interact at a really, really high quality level. They need to share screens, documents, information, and as such, they have stolen a lot of business and revenue from the airline industries because they have been disruptive. They have said, we can provide a platform that will allow you to do a lot of this stuff remotely without it being gimmicky. So these are the ways you can disrupt an industry. So there's a variety of ways to reach those consumers. Some of the consumers will be up for new ideas, and the vast majority of them certainly will not be. They'll be stuck in their ways and they won't understand innovation. So in the case of coronavirus, recently it's forced people to use Zoom, because Zoom was not new technology, but what's happened is you need a catalyst for change. It's all very well having amazing new technology, but you need a catalyst. And in this instance, the catalyst was coronavirus. Now, you won't always get that. Zoom's been around for quite a while, and of course, due to the recent massive demand, Zoom has had to grow up rapidly and make strategic partnerships to make sure it can cope with demand. Anyway, as a disruptive business, over time, they'll build a foothold in the market, and through a process of continuous improvement and innovation, they'll break into a competitive market that they were previously not involved with, given the example there with meeting space, if you like, for Zoom. They'll usually be equipped with a better product and a better understanding of the customer experience, because that will be very recent research for them. So this new company is actually better positioned and better able to push the established players out of the market. And we see that time and time again. Look at things like Kodak, the biggest photography company in the world, the biggest digital camera company in the world, and they've been wiped out completely, yet they developed the digital camera. You look at places like Nokia that produced model after model after model, it folded in half, you can touch the screen, you can play Snake, there's all these different models. Now what they didn't do was step back, innovate, look at what their market needed, look at what their products needed to have, and as such they also became extinct. Largely because of Apple. Using that example, in fact, successful companies such as RIM, for example, who had BlackBerry, so they cornered the business and corporate markets because IT companies were able to lock down those devices and make them very, very secure. Now, RIM decided they wanted to, keep growing, which is entirely understandable, but instead of growing on what they did very strongly, they decided to adapt the Apple approach and totally tear up the rule book and go again. Yet they had a very strong product at the time, and as such, they developed a poor second place, and they've also squeezed themselves out of the market. So often these larger companies tend to make the mistake of initially overlooking new entrants and perceiving them to be operating in a different realm. So if we look at 3 examples of disruptive innovation and how each company used it to transform their industries. So if we look at something such as Netflix, so Netflix is a textbook example of a disruptive innovation. So it started out as a company just supplying DVDs in the post. Netflix offered cost-effective and convenient products to an area of the market that was largely overlooked. It targeted people who were movie buffs but not necessarily interested in the new releases. So Netflix was providing a tailored product to a very specific group of people. So if you look at the success of Netflix, they have made the very bold move to disrupt its own business model, and it moved away from the safe space of physical digital media, and it started moving into streaming media, which was a big deal at the time because it was so difficult to stream anything. I mean, we're talking around the time when you used to kind of load a computer on the internet and you'd hear the dial-up modem, and you bit by bit you would see the picture start to emerge. And you know, it was those kind of times, so to be that brave and that disruptive and that forward thinking for the long term was a pretty big deal. But Netflix have absolutely smashed it, and they have took their competition by storm. Their latest disruptive endeavour, if you like, or one of them, I guess, back in 2013, when Netflix also entered the production business, and that has been a roaring success for Netflix so far, and it's proved that they really know how to disrupt. If you caught my podcast with Bobby Holland-Hanton, he was recently in a film with Chris Hemsworth, which was the biggest streamed Netflix film of all time. And at the time of filming with me, he had over 100 million views of Extraction, and that is absolutely phenomenal. If we look at something like Apple iTunes, again, you know, a little bit outdated now with Spotify and things, but disruptive in its time. So the year in 2001 saw the release of the first iPod. It was a portable media player, and that could hold an average of 1,000 songs at the time. So in itself, the iPod was not designed really as an attempt to disrupt at being disruptive. There was a range of other devices that already existed, although the iPod itself was a much better product than the others. It didn't intentionally target a new market. You know, there was MP3 players and that kind of things. But crucially, it was a combination of the iPod and the simultaneous release of iTunes as a music library, a media library, a music marketplace. And it locked iPod users into purchasing music only through iTunes, which at the time was so disruptive. It caused loads of lawsuits, it caused legal battles, it caused artists to pull their music off, it caused people to complain, and of course eventually change happens. And for change to happen, change needs a catalyst, and when you get to a kind of tipping point, then change starts happening organically, and this is exactly what happened with streaming music. And then along came things like Spotify and other such platforms. And what you find by doing that, you no longer had to buy CDs or albums or pre-compiled mix discs. And in offering streaming services in that way, it offered a lower price point for consumers. So by integrating the internet into the music curation process, Apple actually used disruptive innovation to change the absolute foundation of the ways customers listened to music at the time. So as a result, things like Walkmans, I don't know if you remember them, but they were cool, they're still cool. In fact, they're coming back in, retro Walkmans, CDs, MP3 players, and even record stores generally are now considered ancient artifacts in today's market. We can look at things like Aldi. So Aldi as a supermarket literally came from nowhere, and it's seen phenomenal success. It's seen an absolute seismic shift in the structure of the grocery market, and that, you know, has largely been to do with discount retailers such as Aldi and Lidl. So in particular, Aldi, you know, it's really leading the warpath to market domination, and it's achieved success through a series of disruptive innovation moves. I mean, one thing that I know of at the time was they actually had technology put in their stores. So despite them being discount stores and known as cheap and low entry at the time, low cost of entry stores, they really invested heavily in technology. So they did massive data analysis in areas before they put their stores there. So they really designed a product to fit the market. And crucially, they didn't just copy their competitors. So their stores started popping up at places their competitors weren't. And what had happened over the previous years, supermarkets would kind of follow a similar pattern and follow each other. But Aldi just worked on data. Now, talking about data, Aldi also employed companies such as Samsung and other people, and they put in installations from CCTV and other kinds of electronic and signal type information devices. So with that, they would do things like people counting, so they knew how many people would come in at a certain time at a certain day. They then started integrating weather information, so they would know based on how many people would come in on a certain day. You know, if it's a Sunday and it's raining, if we're expecting rain, we are expecting X amount of people and we're expecting X amount of turnover, so they can work out revenue per head according to the conditions at play. Now, Aldi were doing this, and this was mental. This was so, so forward thinking at the time. But it became really clever, because what it allowed was to Aldi to employ multi-skilled staff and to use data to predict what their business was going to do according to a set of forecast circumstances. So if people are on 0 hours contract, what it would do is automatically summon people into work. So, it needs an extra 5 people at work this weekend, or maybe the following weekend it needs less people because we're expecting, really amazing weather or whatever was going to affect those things. And they were really, really forward thinking in that approach. They also tore up the rule book in terms of the established players, and they carved their own path. So they had a focus on high quality produce at really low prices. And Aldi has been gradually winning over the British consumer ever since. They've been able to achieve invaluable combination of high quality but low prices, and they've restructured the traditional food retail business model. By moving away from a preoccupation with established brands, and by educating consumers that unknown brands are not synonymous with low quality, Aldi actually redefined the ways consumers shop. Whereas if you look at a traditional supermarket, they kept going back to their customer and saying, we've got these products that you buy, but we can do this discount, or we can do this multi-pack deal, or we can do the other. Aldi, again, like Zoom did, looked at the source of the problem. What is the client actually trying to achieve? They're not trying to achieve flights. They're trying to achieve, business operation efficiency. So in this instance, they've looked at the customer. What's the customer trying to achieve? Affordable. As I was saying, like my friend Coulter Hayes said, when he was trying to influence how they approach race and diversity in the police force, there's only so much you can do. You can only affect those circles around you, and by influencing the circles you can influence and not concerning yourself overly with the ones you can't, you gradually grow your circle of influence. It's like a ripple effect, and Aldi are a perfect example of where this ripple effect has knocked on into British consumers, and bit by bit they're now classed as a mainstream brand producing high quality products that are affordable, so they're able to retain really strong margins and really competitive pricing. But actually, their overheads are starting to come down, whereas some of the premium brands with some of the main supermarkets, they're not able to achieve the same kind of balance. Similarly, they introduce things like kind of high-speed checkouts, as we know, all the memes that are on the internet. And that, that's not wrong. That's there for a reason. They multi-train their staff, so the staff can do different things and dip in and out of other jobs. They have very modest sized stores, so they don't have to concern themselves with an overly large distribution network, and they've avoided a 24-hour operation. So they effectively fill shelves during the day. So those people are used in so many different ways. And it's a very, very powerful model, and it's about analysing your potential customer base and what could work and what couldn't work, and being brave enough to validate your market and then actually try something. So we know that disruptive innovation works, as there are some well-known examples of success stories, and I've mentioned just a few there. But the catch is that disruptive innovation only works when it is done very well. It's an obvious thing to say, but it's not an easy one to implement. So there's a few tips to help you along your way to innovate and disrupt your industry. So first of all, you need to change your attitude. So disruptive ideas will never be realised without a change of attitude. Viewing these innovations through the lens of the current business model will inevitably create barriers for implementation. So you need to reassess your processes and adapt them to allow room for disruption. Now, if you're just new in a market, you have probably got a head start over an existing company that services that market, because they're going to be pretty stuck in their ways. So be agile. An agile approach is key to successful disruption, as it enables constant testing and reiterating and tweaking, and often these innovations involve creating new markets or products. So therefore, much of the process relies on trusting the unknown, and that there will be no available pre-existing research or information to enable data-driven decisions. So you need a bit of creative discovery, you need a bit of intuition, and you need to aggregate your own data. You need to try and validate your market and speak to people who are in the know, that don't have an ulterior motive for the answers they give you. It should be about changing the market to help the customers, rather than changing your customers to fit your market. Now, you'll find a lot of old and legacy companies will have to start selling harder and harder and marketing harder and harder, because their products fit less and less. And so don't be in that boat. Literally open your eyes, open your ears, and dare to imagine what really would work for your customer if you had a blank piece of paper. Now, one of the most important things is just don't be afraid to fail. You know, disruptive innovation will not always be successful. I won't give you the statistics on just how often it will fail, because it will scare you, but it's the very nature of disruption for it to be pretty turbulent along the way. Nevertheless, in experiencing a series of innovations that are not successful, you are then building the foundations for a new and profitable business model in the long run. So I hope that helps you guys, and I hope you have an amazing week ahead. Feel free to drop me any comments, questions, anything like that, or reach out to me on social media. Cheers.